The old school felt like a ghost that hadn't quite realized it was dead. The kind of quiet that filled the hallways wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping house. It was a heavy, hollow silence. It was the sound of emptiness where there used to be life. Lockers, once plastered with peeling stickers and faded photos, stood with their metal doors hanging open. They looked like surprised mouths, frozen in a final gasp. The floor was scuffed from a million sneakers. But now it was littered only with dust bunnies and a single, forgotten permission slip from a field trip that felt like a lifetime ago. Outside, in the parking lot, the last of the day's work was wrapping up. A small truck was being loaded with the final boxes from the main office. They weren't important boxes. The real records, the computers, the trophies, had been moved weeks ago. These were the forgotten things. A box of dried-up markers from the art room. A stack of yearbooks from the 1980s that nobody had claimed. A cracked globe with a pen stuck in the Atlantic Ocean dot. The man supervising it all stood with his arms crossed, watching. He was the principal, and he looked more tired than anyone had ever seen him. His tie was loose, and there was a smudge of dust on his shoulder. This building had been his life for 15 years. He had been a teacher here before that. He knew every creak in the floorboards of the science wing, which water fountain had the coldest water, and exactly how the afternoon light would fall across the library in late October. Tomorrow, machines would come. Big, noisy machines with metal jaws that would crunch into the bricks he'd watched being repointed. Into the windows he'd watched kids press, their noses against on snowy days. He heard a soft shuffle of feet on the dusty linoleum behind him. He turned. It was one of the students. A senior boy. The principal knew him, but not in the loud, noticeable way he knew the star athletes or the debate team champions. This boy was quiet. He was the kind of kid who was always in the background of group photos, offering a small, kind smile. He spent his lunches in the art studio, usually drawing in a sketchbook. He was polite, helpful, but he moved through the halls like a shadow present. But easy to miss if you weren't looking. The boy's name was Leo. He stood there, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn-out jacket. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked past the principal, through the open doors of the auditorium, which was dark except for a single dusty emergency light. "Can I help you, son?" The principal asked, his voice softer than he meant it to be. "Everything's cleared out. We're locking up for good in about 20 minutes. Leo's eyes flicked back to him. They were a warm brown, and right now they held a look of quiet urgency. "I know, sir," he said. His voice was low, but clear. I had a question. A request, really." The principal waited. He'd had a lot of requests today. A teacher wanting one last look at her classroom. A former student, now grown with kids of her own, asking to take a brick as a souvenir. He'd said yes to most of them. What was one more? "It's about the piano," Leo said. "In the auditorium." Ah, the piano. The principal almost smiled. It was an old Baldwin upright, a dark wooden beast that had been on that stage since before he was born. Its keys were yellow with age, like old teeth. Some of them stuck. The middle C had a buzz to it that sounded like an annoyed bee. The music teacher had been begging for a new one for a decade, but the budget never allowed it. The kids called it the clunker. It was scheduled to be hauled away with the rest of the unclaimed furniture next week, probably to end up in a dump. What about it? The principal asked. Leo took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. I was wondering if I could play it. One last time. Before everything's gone. The request hung in the dusty air between them. It was so simple, yet it felt heavier than any of the others. This wasn't about taking a piece of the school. It was about feeling a piece of it one last time. The principal studied the boy's face. He wasn't a musician, Not that the principal knew of. He wasn't in the jazz band or the choir. He'd never performed in a talent show. You play? The principal asked. A little, Leo said. It wasn't a shy answer, or a boastful one. It was just a fact. My grandmother taught me. On that piano? And there it was. The principal felt something click into place. Leo's grandmother. Of course. She had been the music teacher here for over 40 years. Mrs. Alvarez? She had retired about 5 years back. A beloved figure who could silence a rowdy assembly just by raising her hand. She had passed away 2 winters ago. The whole school had felt it. The principal remembered her well. She had eyes that could twinkle with mischief during a fun pop song, but could also go soft and deep when a student finally mastered a difficult passage. He pictured her, sitting on that worn bench next to a young Leo, guiding his small fingers on the keys after everyone else had gone home. He could almost hear the patient sound of her voice, the wrong notes, and then the triumph of a correct chord echoing in the empty auditorium. That piano wasn't just an old instrument to this boy. It was a time machine. It was a connection to someone he loved deeply in a place they had shared. The principal looked at the keys in his hand. The big, brass master key that unlocked every door in this dying building. He felt the weight of them. He was the last keeper of this place. His job today was to shut it down, to seal its fate. But another part of his job, the part that mattered more, had always been to take care of the people in it. He looked from the keys to Leo's hopeful, anxious face, and then back through the auditorium doors. An hour, the principal said finally, his voice a little rough. He separated the auditorium key from the ring. It was a smaller silver key, worn smooth from use. He held it out. The crews will be here at sunrise, so I need to do the final lockup tonight. But you've got 1 hour, Leo. Play as long as you want inside that hour. Leo's entire body seemed to relax. A look of profound gratitude washed over his face. He reached out and took the key. His fingers closed around it tightly. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Just make sure the door is locked behind you when you leave, the principal said, and leave the key on the front steps. I'll pick it up later. Leo nodded, already turning toward the auditorium doors. He paused for a second, looking into the darkness. It wasn't a scary darkness to him. It was a familiar one. The principal watched him go. The boy pushed through the heavy double doors, and they swung shut behind him with a soft, final-sounding thump. The principal was left alone again in the silent hallway. He suddenly felt like an intruder. This moment, whatever was about to happen in that auditorium, wasn't for him. It was private. It was between a boy, a piano, and a memory. He walked back outside to the fading afternoon light. The truck was pulling away. The parking lot was empty. He sat down on the front steps of the school, the concrete still warm from the sun. He didn't leave. He told himself he was just making sure the boy was okay, that he would lock up properly. But that wasn't really it. He was waiting. He didn't know what for. Maybe just to hear a single note, a sign of life from the heart of the silent building, before he turned the key for the last time and walked away. The principal sat on the steps, letting the cool of the evening settle around him. He wasn't sure what he expected to hear. Maybe the hesitant plinking of a beginner's song, something simple and slow. He braced himself for it, feeling a pang of sympathy for the boy in there, alone with his memories. But no sound came. The building remained silent, a great brick animal holding its breath. The principal checked his watch. 5 minutes had passed since the doors closed. Maybe the boy was just sitting there, thinking. Maybe the moment was too big, and he had changed his mind. The principal almost stood up to go check, but something made him stay put. He had given the boy an hour. He would respect that dot over by the side of the building. A car door slammed. He looked up. It was one of the teachers, an older woman who taught English. She was carrying a final box of her things to her car. She saw the principal sitting there and paused, her head tilting. She walked over, her sensible shoes quiet on the asphalt. "All locked up?" she asked, setting her box down. "Almost," he said, giving it another few minutes. She nodded, looking up at the dark windows. Hard to believe it's really the end. She was quiet for a moment. Then she frowned, listening to the same silence he was. It feels too quiet, like it's waiting for something. Just then, a young woman came out of the main doors. She was a student, the president of the student council. She had been helping with the final clean-out. She had a backpack slung over one shoulder and looked tired, but her eyes were bright. "Forgot my water bottle," she said, holding it up. She glanced at the principal and the teacher. "Everything okay?" "Fine," the principal said. "Just taking a moment." The student council president nodded, but she didn't leave. She followed their gaze to the silent school. "It's weird, isn't it?" she said softly, "knowing you'll never walk through those doors again. It's like a part of your life is just shutting off." The three of them stood there, a little awkwardly, in the gathering dusk. They were all waiting, though none of them could say exactly what for. The connection between them was the building, and the shared, unspoken feeling of loss that hung in the air. Then, from deep within the school, a sound reached them. Dot. It wasn't music. Not yet dot. It was a single, clear piano note that had hung in the air, pure and resonant, cutting through the quiet evening. It was followed by another, and another. They were not random notes. They were deliberate, spaced apart, like someone testing the ground, feeling the soul of the instrument. The English teacher caught her breath. The student council president froze, her head cocked. The notes stopped. There was a pause, longer this time, filled with a new kind of tension. Dot. And then the music began. Dot. It was not chopsticks. It was not a pop song or a simple hymn. It was something complex, old, and full of a deep, rolling emotion. It was sorrowful, but not sad, powerful, but quiet. It poured out of the old building's open windows, spilling into the parking lot like something liquid and golden. The three people outside looked at each other, stunned. This was not what any of them had expected. The English teacher's hand went to her chest. That's Chopin," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. Inside, the boy's hands moved over the keys. He was no longer just Leo, the quiet senior. In the dark auditorium, lit only by the exit sign and the faint streetlight glow from a high window, he was a vessel for something else. The stiffness left his shoulders. His eyes were closed. He wasn't thinking about finger placement or technique. He was thinking of his grandmother's hands, resting gently on top of his, guiding him. He was thinking of her voice, humming the melody when he was too small to reach the pedals. The piano, for all its clunks and buzzes, felt alive under his fingers. It was an old friend. It remembered her. The music swelled, filling the empty space. It bounced off the bare walls and the empty velvet seats. It rose up to the rafters where the stage lights used to hang, and it traveled down the hall. In the main office, the head custodian was making his last rounds. He was a man who knew every inch of this building better than anyone. He knew which floorboard in the history wing squeaked the loudest, and exactly how to jiggle the handle on the girls' bathroom on the second floor to get it to latch. He was wiping down a counter, saying a silent goodbye to the room when the first notes reached him. He stopped. The rag hung motionless in his hand. He listened. A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He put the rag down and walked quietly out of the office, following the sound like a thread, pulling him forward. He met the school secretary in the hallway. She was supposed to be gone an hour ago, but had come back for a plant she'd forgotten. She was holding the pot, her eyes wide. "Is that?" she whispered. The custodian just nodded. Together, they moved toward the auditorium doors. They didn't go in. They stood outside in the dark hallway, listening. The custodian leaned his head against the cool wood of the door. He'd mopped this floor 1,000 times after concerts. He'd picked up abandoned programs and spilled candy. This music was the sound of all those nights. Back outside, the small group had grown. The English teacher had sent a quiet text to another teacher, a man who taught history and coached the baseball team. He had been driving away, but turned his car around. Now he stood with them, his arms crossed, staring at the school as if seeing it for the first time. A couple of other students, hanging out in the parking lot, wondering what to do on this strange last evening, drifted over. Someone's younger brother, waiting for a ride, came and stood next to the student council president. No one spoke. They just listened. The music changed. It moved from the powerful, deep parts to passages that were lighter, almost like a memory of laughter. Then it would dip again into something so beautifully mournful it made your heart ache. The student council president thought of her first dance in the gym, which was right next to the auditorium. The thump of bad pop music, her nervousness, the way the sound had bled through the walls. This was different. This was the school's real heart, finally beating out loud. The history teacher remembered the Veterans Day assemblies held in there, the old soldiers sitting stiffly in the front row as kids fidgeted. He remembered the quiet that fell when a veteran spoke. This music had the same weight to it. Inside, Leo played. He played through a mistake, a wrong note that the old piano gave him, and he didn't flinch. He wove it into the song, making it part of the story. His grandmother had taught him that. Music isn't about being perfect, she'd say. It's about being true. Even the wrong notes belong if you play them with heart. He played for her. He played for the empty seats where she used to sit, grading papers while he practiced. He played for the years this piano had witnessed the off-key holiday concerts, the passionate solos from kids who would go on to do other things, the quiet hours of learning and struggle. He didn't know he had an audience. He thought he was completely alone. But outside the auditorium doors, in the dark hallway, 5 people now stood. The custodian and the secretary, a math teacher who had been working late in her classroom, 2 freshmen who had been finishing a project. Drawn by the haunting sound, and outside on the steps, a gathering of 7 or 8 people stood in a semicircle, looking up at the window where the sound was strongest. They were perfectly still. Some had their eyes closed. One of the younger students had tears on her cheeks, though she couldn't have said why. The principal looked around at the faces lit by the distant streetlights. He saw the reflections of the music in their eyes. This was why he had become an educator. Not for the tests or the paperwork, but for these silent, shared moments of understanding. For the unexpected beauty that could come from a quiet kid in a doomed building on a random Wednesday night. He had given the boy a key to an empty room. But the boy, without knowing it, had unlocked something for all of them. He was playing the school's final song, and in doing so, he was giving them all away to say goodbye. Not with a wrecking ball's crash, but with a melody that was already stitching itself into their memories, making the end of this place feel less like a death and more like a release. The last light of the day was gone now, replaced by a deep blue twilight. The parking lot lights flickered on with a soft buzz, casting long, dramatic shadows. But nobody in the small crowd outside paid any attention to the changing sky. They were held fast by the music god. It wasn't just music anymore. It had become a living thing. It wrapped around the old brick building like a blanket. It slipped through the open windows and drifted out into the neighborhood. A man walking his dog down the sidewalk stopped. He stood still, the dog sitting patiently at his feet, its head tilted. A woman watering her flowers across the street turned off her hose and just listened, the water-forgotten dot inside the auditorium. The boy was lost. The world outside the circle of the piano bench had ceased to exist. There was no tomorrow's demolition, no empty school. There was only the map of the keyboard under his fingers and the landscape of the song. In his heart, he was thinking of a specific afternoon. He must have been 10 or 11. He'd had a terrible day at school. Kids had been mean about a drawing he'd made. He'd come to find his grandmother after the final bell, fighting back tears. She hadn't asked questions. She'd just taken his hand and led him here to this piano. She'd sat him down. "Play it," she'd said. "Play what?" He'd mumbled, his throat tight. "The feeling. Play the feeling." He'd smashed his hands on the keys in frustration, a horrible, clashing noise. She'd let him. Then, gently, she'd guided his right hand to find a single, high, clear note. "There," she'd whispered. "That's the loneliness. Now find the anger." He'd found a low cluster of notes. "Good. Now, find what's underneath the anger. The hurt." Slowly, note by note, they had built a small, sad, personal song that day. It wasn't Chopin. It was just his. And by the end of it, the weight in his chest had lifted. He hadn't solved his problem, but he had put it outside of himself, into the air, where it lost some of its power. That's what he was doing now. He was playing the feeling of loss so big, it felt like a hollow space inside him. The feeling of love that was still so strong, it warmed that hollow space. The gratitude for all those quiet after-school hours. The fear of moving on without this anchor. He wasn't just playing notes written by a long-dead composer. He was pouring his own story into the spaces between them. The old piano answered him. It didn't sound like a concert grand in a fancy hall. It sounded like history. The faint buzz on the middle C was the voice of every child who had ever hit that key too hard. The slight rattle of the pedals was the ghost of 1,000 nervous feet tapping time. The rich, warm tone of the lower keys was the sound of the building itself, of generations of slamming lockers and shouted greetings and silent focus in study hall. He moved into a section of the piece that was all flowing, rapid notes like a river running over stones. His fingers, which seemed so clumsy when he tried to tie his tie or work a complicated tool, flew across the keyboard with a certainty that surprised even him. It was a muscle memory etched into him by years of patient teaching. He could almost feel her hand on his shoulder, a steady, reassuring pressure. Outside the doors, the audience in the hallway had grown. A few more students had wandered in, drawn from the parking lot by the undeniable pull of the sound. A parent, arriving to pick someone up, had come inside too. They formed a small, respectful cluster. No one tried to open the doors. It felt sacred. They were like pilgrims listening at the gate of a shrine. The head custodian had slipped away and come back, with a few folding chairs from a nearby classroom. He set them up quietly. The older English teacher sat down, her hands clasped in her lap. She wasn't seeing the dark, empty hallway. She was seeing the stage lit up for the spring play years ago. She'd directed Our Town, and in the scene where Emily says goodbye to the world, a student had played a simple piano piece. It hadn't been nearly as skilled as this, but it had the same heartbreaking honesty. She felt a tear trace, a warm path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. The student council president was leaning against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself. She was a planner, a doer, someone who always thought of the next step. But this music forced her to be still. It forced her to feel. She thought about all the meetings in this building, the passionate arguments, the silly inside jokes, the frantic last-minute planning for dances. It had all felt so urgent, so world-changing. Now it was all just memory. The music was giving those memories a beautiful, tender shape. It was okay that they were over. This song was the perfect goodbye. The principal stood just outside the main doors, halfway between the crowd inside and the crowd outside. He could feel the vibration of the low notes through the soles of his shoes. He looked at his watch. The boys' hour was almost up. A practical part of his mind knew he should start thinking about wrapping this up, about getting everyone out so he could lock the doors for the final time. But he couldn't move. He was a prisoner to the beauty of it. He thought of all the assemblies he'd presided over in that auditorium. The boring safety presentations, the repetitive award ceremonies, the pep rallies where the noise was so loud it hurt your ears. He'd sometimes stood at this very spot, watching the clock, waiting for them to end. He wished he could go back and tell his younger self to listen harder, to listen for the life in it, because this right now was the soul of all of it. This single, focused, heartfelt expression was the reason the building had existed in the first place. Not to house textbooks or administer tests, but to give space for a moment like this to happen. The music began to slow. The river of notes became a stream, then a trickle. It was moving toward its conclusion. The feeling in the air shifted. The anticipation among the listeners tightened. It was no longer about being surprised by the skill of the player. It was about witnessing something true reach its end. Inside, Leo's breath was coming in slow, even pulls. His shoulders ached faintly, but it was a good ache. The hollow space inside him didn't feel so hollow anymore. It felt full of sound, full of her. He reached a series of chords that were like questions, hanging in the dusty air of the auditorium. The silence between them was as important as the notes themselves. He thought of the last thing his grandmother ever said to him about music. She was sick by then, her voice weak. He'd played for her at her house, on her small spinet piano. Remember, she'd whispered, the song isn't in the piano, and it's not even really in the notes on the page. She'd tapped a bony finger over his heart. It's in here. The piano just lets it out. So even when this old school is gone, and even when I'm gone, the song isn't, because it's in you. You just have to be brave enough to let it out. He played the final questioning chord. It shimmered in the darkness, vibrating through the wood of the piano, through the floor, into the very bones of the building. And then, with a tenderness that made the custodian in the hallway close his eyes, the boy played the resolution. It was a single, simple, pure chord. Not loud, not flashy. It was an answer. It was acceptance. It was love given a sound. The note faded, slower and slower, until it was gone. And in its place was a silence so deep, so complete, it felt louder than the music had been. The silence after the final note was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the empty silence from before. This silence was full. It was heavy with everything that had just been said in a language without words. It pressed gently on the ears of everyone listening. In the dark auditorium, the boy sat very still. His hands rested in his lap, feeling light and strange, as if they'd been holding something heavy for a long time and had just put it down. The ghost of the last chord seemed to hang in the air around him. He could smell the old piano, a scent of dust, felt, and polished wood that was his grandmother's smell, the smell of safety. He let out a long, slow breath. He felt peaceful. Sad, but a clean kind of sad. Like after a good, hard cry. He didn't know about the people standing in the dark hallway. He didn't know about the small crowd on the steps outside. He thought this moment was his alone. He reached out and gently touched the wood above the keys. It was smooth and cool. "Thank you," he whispered, to the piano, to the room, to the memory. Then he stood up. The piano bench scraped softly on the stage floor, a small, ordinary sound that broke the spell. The sound of the bench moving was like a signal. In the hallway, people shifted. They blinked as if waking up. They looked at each other, a little embarrassed, but also connected by a secret. No one knew what to do or say. What do you say after you've overheard someone's heart? The head custodian was the first to move. He understood spaces and practical things. He began quietly gathering the folding chairs, his movements slow and respectful. The sound of the chairs clicking shut was soft. It felt like the right thing to do, to clean up after something important. The English teacher wiped her cheeks with the backs of her hands. She gave a small, shaky smile to the history teacher beside her. He nodded back, his own eyes looking bright in the dim light. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Inside the auditorium, the boy was walking. His footsteps echoed in the big, empty space as he walked off the stage and up the center aisle. He pushed through the heavy double doors, and stopped. The hallway was not empty. A group of people, teachers, students, the custodian, the secretary, were standing there, looking right at him. They were all perfectly quiet. For a terrible second, his heart slammed against his ribs. Heat rushed to his face. They had heard. They had heard everything. A wave of embarrassment, hot and sharp, washed over him. He wanted to disappear into the floor, but then he saw their faces. They weren't laughing. They weren't looking at him with pity or confusion. They were looking at him with something else. Something like respect. Something like gratitude. The student council president gave him a small, sincere smile. The custodian gave him a firm nod, as if to say, "Well done, son." The English teacher stepped forward, just one small step. Her voice was thick with emotion, but she kept it low. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in this building," she said. "Thank you." The boy Leo couldn't find any words. His throat was too tight. All he could manage was a slight, awkward dip of his head. The kindness in her words, and in the faces of the others, slowly melted the embarrassment away, replacing it with a warm, shy wonder. He remembered the key in his pocket. He walked past them, his eyes on the floor, but feeling their gentle, watching silence. He walked down the main hallway, past the open lockers, toward the front doors. The group in the auditorium hallway followed him at a distance, not crowding him, but flowing out into the main hall. He pushed open the front doors. The cool night air hit his face, and he saw another group, outside on the steps and in the parking lot, turning to look at him. The principal was there, and more students, and people he didn't even recognize. A man with a dog. A woman from across the street. For the second time in 2 minutes, he froze. The principal walked up the steps toward him. Leo fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the small silver key. He held it out. His hand was steady. The principal took it. He closed his hand around the key, feeling the last bit of warmth from the boy's pocket. He looked at Leo's face, the quiet relief in it, the tired peace. "Your grandmother," the principal said softly, so only the boy could hear. "She would be so very proud. Not just of the music. Of you." This time, a word did make it out of Leo's tight throat. "Thanks," he whispered. He needed to get out of there, to be alone with all the feelings swirling inside him. He gave one more quick, general glance around at the faces watching him, not staring, just observing, and then he walked down the steps. The small crowd parted softly to let him through. He headed across the parking lot toward the street, his hands back in his pockets, his shoulders hunched slightly against the world that no one called after him. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. They just watched him go, understanding that what had happened was private. even if they had been allowed to witness the edges of it, as he disappeared into the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. The spell began to loosen its hold on everyone else. Soft conversations started, like the first drops of rain after a storm. I had no idea he could play like that. That was for his grandma, you know. She taught music here. I've never heard the old piano sound like that. What was that song? It was so sad, but nice. The principal finally moved, turning to face what was left of his school. The people looked at him, waiting. He was still the principal. It was still his job to close the door. "All right," he said, his voice carrying gently on the night air. I think that's our send-off. Thank you for being here for it." He held up the key. "I have to lock up now." People nodded. They began to drift away, back to their cars, walking down the sidewalk toward home. Their movements were slow, thoughtful. They carried the music with them in their heads. The principal watched them go. The English teacher paused before getting into her car. She looked back at the school, then at the principal. She simply raised a hand in farewell. He raised his back. Soon, it was just him and the head custodian. The custodian came over, a final ring of keys in his own hand. "I'll do a last walk through, boss. Check the back exits." "I'll wait," the principal said. As the custodian disappeared inside, the principal stood on the steps. He looked at the dark, silent building. It didn't feel sad anymore. It felt complete. The boy's music had been like a final deep breath. Now the building could rest. It had done its job. It had held the small daily dramas of growing up, and for one last night, it had held something magnificent and true. The custodian came back out, pulling the doors shut behind him with a solid thunk. "All clear," he said. The principal stepped forward. He slid the master key into the lock of the big front doors. He turned it. The click was loud and final in the quiet night. He tried the handle. It held fast. That was it. It was over. He and the custodian walked to their cars together without speaking. They got in and drove away, their headlights sweeping across the brick face of the school. The building was dark. It was locked. It was empty. But if you had stood on the sidewalk in the deep quiet of the night and listened with more than your ears, you might have felt it. A kind of echo, not of sound, but of feeling. A resonance left behind in the very air, like the warmth from a stone that has been sitting in the sun. The song was finished, but its story, for everyone who heard it, was just beginning to settle. And for the boy walking home alone under the streetlights, his heart was finally, fully ready to say goodbye. The sun came up the next morning like it was just any other day. It didn't know about goodbyes or final moments. It just rose, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. At the school, the peace of the night was gone. It was replaced by the growl of diesel engines and the sharp, busy sounds of men at work. Big, yellow machines sat in the parking lot like sleeping giants now awake. A tall fence had been put up around the property, with signs warning people to keep out. The air smelled of dust and diesel fuel. The wrecking ball was there, too. It wasn't a giant metal ball like in cartoons. It was a different kind of machine, one with a long arm and a claw that could crunch and grab. But the idea was the same. It was a machine for taking things apart. The crew got to work. They started on the far wing, the one that held the old shop classes. The sound of the first wall coming down was a huge, crunching roar. It was followed by a cloud of dust that billowed up into the clean morning air. Bricks tumbled. Wood splintered. It was loud, and it was final. Across the street, and on the sidewalks, people stopped to watch. Some of them were the same people who had been there the night before. The English teacher stood on her porch with a mug of coffee, watching the dust cloud rise. She didn't stay long. It was too hard to see. The sound of the collapse felt crude and clumsy after the delicate beauty of the music. The student council president rode her bike past on her way to her summer job. She stopped for a minute, her feet planted on the pavement. She watched a section of the roof cave in. She thought about the piano, probably still on the stage in the auditorium, waiting for its own end. She felt a lump in her throat, but it wasn't as sharp as she expected. The music had somehow already taken the heart of the place away, somewhere safe. What was happening now was just to the shell. The head custodian didn't come to watch. He was already at his new job, at the elementary school across town. But as he was buffing a shiny new floor, he paused. He thought he heard, for just a second, the echo of a piano note. It was just the whine of his buffer, of course. But he smiled a little to himself. And what about the boy? He slept late. When he woke up, he could hear the distant, low thunder of the demolition. He lay in bed and listened to it. He thought he would feel a sharp pain, a horrible sadness. But he didn't. He felt quiet. Empty, but in a good way, like a room that has been cleared out and cleaned, ready for something new. He got up and went to his desk. He opened his sketchbook. For years, he had drawn buildings, cars, intricate mazes. Now he found a fresh page. He didn't think about it. His pencil just started to move. He didn't draw the school as it was. He drew the feeling of the auditorium. He drew the way the sound had felt as it left the piano not as notes, but as soft, swirling shapes, like visible wind. He drew the shadows of the empty seats not as empty, but as if they were full of light. He drew for a long time. Later in the afternoon, he went for a walk. He didn't mean to go toward the school, but his feet took him there. He stood outside the fence, his hands in his pockets. He watched the claw machine bite into the gymnasium wall. It was strange. It didn't feel like his school anymore. That place, his and his grandmother's, was already gone. It had left last night in the final note of that song. This was just a construction site. A voice beside him said, "Hard to watch, huh?" He turned. It was the principal. He was also standing there, in plain clothes, just watching. "Yeah," the boy said. Then he added, "But not as hard as I thought." The principal nodded. "I know what you mean." They stood in silence for a few minutes, two figures side by side, watching the past get taken apart piece by piece. "What you did last night," the principal said, not looking at him. "That gave it a proper ending. I think we all needed that more than we knew." The boy just nodded. "You know," the principal said, "they're salvaging some things. The old oak from the front doors. Some of the bricks. They're going to make them into benches for the new community center. A little piece of it will stay." That was nice, the boy thought. But he didn't need a brick or a piece of wood. He had what he needed. It was inside him. It was the memory of his grandmother's hands. It was the feeling of the keys under his fingers. It was the way the silence had felt after he finished, full and complete. A few weeks later, the new community center opened. It was bright and modern, with big windows and a shiny gym floor. On the opening day, there was a little ceremony. The principal was there, and some of the teachers. They had a plaque made from one of the old school's limestone pieces. The boy didn't go. He was busy. He had gotten a job helping at a local frame shop. He was saving for art supplies for college. He still played piano, sometimes on the old upright at his aunt's house. It wasn't the same, but that was okay. The song wasn't in that piano either. One evening, he was walking home from work. His route took him past the new community center. It was lit up, full of people playing basketball and kids running in a playgroup. It was loud and alive. It was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. He was about to walk on when something caught his eye. Over by the entrance, there was a small garden area, and in that garden there was a bench. It was a simple, nice bench, and on a small, discreet plaque on the back of it were the words, "Made from the oak of Maplewood High School. May new memories grow here." Sitting on that bench, all alone, was the old English teacher. She was just sitting, watching the people come and go, a small, peaceful smile on her face. He almost walked over, but he didn't. He just watched for a moment. He saw her run her hand over the wood of the bench, a touch that was both a hello and a goodbye. He realized then what had really happened that last night. The music hadn't just been his goodbye. It had been a gift to everyone who heard it. It had taken their own memories, their own private loves and losses, connected to that building, and it had given them a sound. It had made their memories into something shared, just for a little while. It had let them all say goodbye together, in a way that was beautiful instead of just sad. The wrecking ball had taken apart the bricks and the mortar, but it couldn't touch that. It couldn't touch the feeling they had all shared, standing together in the dark, listening. The boy turned and walked home. The night was clear, and a few stars were coming out. He wasn't thinking about the past anymore. He was thinking about the sketch he wanted to start when he got home. A new one. He wasn't sure what it would be yet, and that was okay. He had the music in him, and now he had space for something new to grow. The old school was gone, but the song and everything it meant was right there with him, step by step, under the wide open sky.